Okay, look, first things first. I know that this is gonna feel a little bit complicated, but I want you to work with me because I'm gonna teach you how it all works, and you're gonna see that not only can you do it, but you're gonna see the power of it, and you're gonna see why it's such a benefit. And there's a lot to it. So, we're gonna have the chapters down below in the description so you can click through to the areas that you wanna learn more about, or just sit tight. I'm going to walk you through everything that this action set can do, because I guarantee you're going to find it beneficial. Now, we have a bunch of different type of images open because it's useful for so much. On top of that, we have a color chart up here, which I'll use to kind of demonstrate some things later. But let's talk about real world applications straight away. Now, in the past, with NBP, you know that I've been really big on the decomposition of an image, right? So to review, frequency separation, which most of you have heard about, and if you haven't, that's okay. We have videos on that, and of course, YouTube has tons of videos on frequency separation. But that is a form of what we call decomposition, right? In other words, we're separating our image into different ways so we can target those ways differently, right? So frequency separation takes our high frequency and our low frequency, depending on the settings, it can vary, and then we can modify it independently. That's one way of decomposing an image, but we can decompose an image lots of other ways, including chroma luma splitting, which is a term that I've kind of picked up from YouTube. And really it's just separating the color from the luminosity information, or the color from the brightness, if you want to call it that, but really it's luminosity. And in doing that, we can target color by itself without affecting luminosity, and vice versa. And these are very beneficial for absolute control, but we can decompose images even further. And we're going to talk about that as we go through all of this. But since I have a ton of different images open, let's walk through a few things immediately. So the first set here, the first 5, which are kind of that teal color, we're not going to go with those right now because those are our workflow actions. We're going to talk about them later on the video, but we're also going to have videos specifically about those because they are workflow stacks. Okay, so we're going to go immediately to these purple ones, which is chroma luma layers. So let's find an image. Doesn't entirely matter. How about this image here? Great image by my friend Ryan Pramick. So if we go to NBP Chroma Luma Layers and just tap it, there you go, it's done. What has happened? All right, let's walk through this, okay? So over here we have the chroma layer and the luma layer. If you hold down Alt or Option and click the little eyeball, you can see this is the chroma. This is the color information with no luminosity information. Tap it again, and then we can look at luminosity. Why is this a benefit? Well, let me show you some of the other actions, what they do and how you can use them to modify chroma and luma. And then you might think of your own ways to modify chroma and luma and think, hey, I need to quickly separate them. And there they are. That's why this action is number 1 here of the purple ones. Because you never know. Once you start getting used to splitting things this way and understanding, oh, I know what I need to do now. Even if you just want to boost saturation, for example, you might want to do that. Okay, well, let's talk about one fast way that it can work. The next one, chroma plus luma layers adjust. Tap that. Now you get 2 basic layers, which are more common for modifying this sort of thing. So we have a curves on top of the luma, meaning that it won't affect the color at all. So if I brighten and darken, I don't have any color shifting or saturation boosting or anything like that. I just modify it by itself. So if I do a little S curve here on that, there you go. I've added some contrast to the luminosity alone. Now on the chroma above it, we have, of course, the hue and saturation adjustment layer known as HSL chroma. And then we can, change the hue if we want the image ever so slightly. We can increase saturation, we can decrease saturation, but we're not getting luminosity information in there, which is messing us up. Okay. And the workflow videos, the workflow section you'll see is going to explain why that can be a benefit in terms of absolute control. But even in the simplest ways, you're going to find that when you want to modify color by separating it or at least targeting it alone, you're going to have a better result. Yes, you can do this with blend modes, but by separating it, sometimes you get just a little bit more of a refined result. And there's some things you cannot do just by targeting with blend modes. And that's why we split it sometimes. Okay, so that's that one. Next, we have the chroma layer by itself. You tap that. There you go. Now you have chroma in case you just need to pull that for some reason. Why might you do that? Well, let's say you pull the chroma and you put it on color blend mode. Now you do a bunch of stuff underneath. You can add other layers to modify things. You can brighten and darken with curve, doesn't matter. All the color information has been extracted, put on top, and then put on color blend mode. So no matter what happens underneath that layer, the color is preserved. So you can go crazy with all kinds of modifications, contrast boosting, whatever, the color will be preserved. Now keep in mind, that's just one way of doing it. That's not the only way to work with it. But if you need to have, or you need a chroma layer, there you have it. Now the next one's pretty obvious, Luma. You click that and you have Luma. Keep in mind that Luma is not a pure desaturation. It's an actual extraction of the luminosity information. And that's why it's such a benefit. It's not just a simple desaturation, okay? Now, in terms of making these kind of changes, this is one perfect example that I put into the action set because I actually use it a lot. And it's a way to throttle saturation, excuse me. And I call it NBP Micro Saturation Control. I'm gonna go ahead and tap that. Now it's done. Now, here's why I call it Micro Saturation Control. Couple of things. One, I'm gonna hold down Alt or Option so you can look at the mask. This is a saturation mask made with chroma information only. So we don't have Luma information messing up our saturation perception. This is pure saturation. Obviously, the Corvette is the most saturated image, part of the image, and everything else is quite less saturated. All these other elements in here, especially in the dark areas, would have given us a false positive had we included luminosity information. That's one way. So we're targeting only the saturated colors. Second, we're using a vibrance adjustment layer, which has a slightly different way of boosting color. The vibrance is one way to boost saturation already, which is more throttled. And then the saturation slider here, which we've talked about in other videos, is different than the one on the hue and saturation. It's a little bit more pleasing, if you will, but we've gone one step further and put the entire thing on color blend mode, meaning we're really going to boost color in a pleasing way. And what I mean by micro, I mean micro, watch. So if I take vibrance all the way up, you notice, especially on the video, it's going to be tough. It is a absolute incremental amount of saturation. Let me go ahead and put that back down and take saturation all the way up. You notice what's happened here. It's boosting saturation in a micro way. So if I move left, I can take saturation down ever so slightly, but my lower saturated areas are not going to go gray real quick. I'm just going to tone down the color if I needed to. If I increase saturation, I'm going to increase the saturated areas, but not so much as much of the low saturated areas. So you'll find that if you run this layer, you'll be able to precisely, and we're going to do it on some landscapes and to show you in a minute, precisely change saturation in a very smart way. Now, to show you a quick counter example, let's put up a normal hue and saturation layer and just boost the saturation. You notice how we get all kinds of sort of trace colors in there that we don't normally want. You see all these yellows and greens? Yes, they're in the concrete, but we don't want them that strong. Maybe we don't, right? And this is why we run micro saturation control. And now we can boost that if we want. And we notice that everything's getting a nice pop of color, but not too much. And if you're really savvy, you know how to modify this mask. You can make it stronger or lighter, etc., etc. But that's why I call it micro. Now, let's say you want to target the chroma information saturated areas, but you don't know what you want to do with it yet, or you have a different idea than just saturation. That's why NBP Chroma Sat Mask Selection comes in. We have a lot of different selectors coming up here. So this first one immediately selects the saturated areas using chroma. So let's say I go to curves. As soon as I choose curves, that selection becomes a mask. And now with curves, if for some reason I wanted to, I can brighten and darken just the saturated areas, which can be an interesting effect. And if you've never tried it, you should absolutely try it. Let's try it something else. Okay. There's our chroma information again. How about on the, our saturation information. How about on the saturated areas? Let's put a photo filter. Why not? Let's increase this so you guys can see. Boom. Boom, we're adding kind of an orange photo filter. What happens if we add a blue one? Interesting. We're adding blue to the saturated areas. Look at the effect we got. It can be for corrective purposes. It can be for creative purposes. You never know. But having a, click it again, having a immediate opportunity to create a saturation mask with chroma data just with one click, you can start finding all kinds of interesting things to do. You can even go to, how about brightness and contrast? We're just going to increase the contrast of the saturated areas. Boom, boom. We're going to decrease the contrast of the saturated areas. Very, very subtle effect, right? Who knows what you can do with it when you have instant access to a chroma saturation mask. Absolutely wonderful. Now you can see a little rainbow options here. These are going to allow us to select the main sort of hue ranges, which is going to be usually in 60-degree increments, which is red, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and magenta. But I have included reds plus yellow, which fuses both of those ranges into a selection, and then cyans plus blue, because quite frankly, we find that situation a lot. Okay, so for example, let's go to, oh, landscapes are good, but let's go ahead and go to probably a portrait. Let's go to a portrait for a second, okay? So if we go to a portrait here, even though the denim is very, very faded, there's not a lot of blue in there. A lot of times when we have a portrait with jeans or something like that, we find that the jeans exist both in blue and cyan. So then we go, oh, we have to select both if we wanted to do something with it, right? Oh, we can target it directly with a hue and saturation layer and click here, right? And then we can change the ranges and move them around. That's fine if we want to do H, S, or L. But what if we want to do something else, right? So we tap NBP Chroma Cyans plus Blue selection, tap it. Give that a second. Now it's selected. You can't always see it. And sometimes it'll come back and say, oh, hey, less than 50% is visible. And that's fine. You can't always see it, but there it is. What if I go to curves, right? And now, very subtle modifications to the cyan and blues at the same time. See, very, very subtle stuff here, but using chroma data, we get a slightly more accurate depiction or a selection of the color that we want. So how about reds plus yellows? Hit that one. Let that process a second. There we go. How about we go to, well, we did curves already. Let's go to brightness and contrast. So we're going to add contrast to the reds and oranges. I mean, the reds and yellows, which basically is orange. Very, very subtle. Very, very subtle. We can even darken it, add a ton of contrast. See that? Very, very subtle. If you look at the mask, it's actually targeted chroma reds and yellows, which is a beautiful, beautiful, subtle selection. That's the key about this whole action set. It's letting you target selections that actually make sense and that are actually usable. So that's a portrait. Let's go for something really colorful. How about this landscape? This is low res. It's just stuff that I screenshot using Google. It doesn't matter. We can still show what it does. So for example, if I were to go to Chroma Cyans, okay, and then I go to curves, if you look at that mask, there's that. Pretty predictable, right? We get some cyans, and then we can, darken and lighten, and that's fine. But let me just hide that real quick. If I go to cyans plus blues, and then go to curves, we have a little bit more range. This is cyans, this cyans and blues. Just a little bit more range to allow us to deepen the sky and the water if we wanted to. See that? And once you have that selection, let's say you want to modify the sky and the water, we've darkened it. Okay, well, next we can take like a vibrance if we want, hold down Alt or Option, copy the mask over, and then we can add vibrance to the blues. And now we've gone from a nice picture and we have a deeper area. We can also come back to our main background, choose, for example, let's go for the oranges again. And then we'll go to, how about a photo filter? And we're going to deepen with more orange. Look at that. Boom, boom. Adding a little bit more orange flavor. Can actually add maybe more yellow. Something like that. See, we're adding a strong yellow to the oranges, which look like this. And these quick, selections allow you to control color in a more refined way, to control ranges in a more refined way. Because I'm telling you, if you go over here and you go to color range, you can get a lot of great results. But once you do that, first of all, you're not using chroma data. Okay, so sometimes you can get a false positive. You can get too many dark areas and light areas that maybe aren't, necessarily accurate to the color you want to select. And then when you go to make changes, it starts to look muddy because you're modifying too much luminosity. And this is why we extract the chroma data. So let's go to this one real quick. We talked about the saturation one. Let's go back up here to the micro sat control. You see how we have only the saturated areas. So not the greatest quality image, but that's all right. If I boost the saturation, see that? And you might think, well, what's the point of boosting all the way to 100 to get a little bit of color? The point is not that going to 100 still looks good. That's not the point. The point is that you have micro control. If you're really dialing in saturation and you're just trying to get right to a threshold that works for your eye, that's what this setup is for. I do this manually all the time, but I created an action because I thought it made more sense, right? Of course it makes more sense. It's certainly a lot quicker. All right, so there's that. Let's go ahead and delete that one there. Now, so that you have the rainbow selection here, so you can make these selections quickly and then do things with them. And it's really, really powerful. But we also have the Luma selections of highlights, midtones, and shadows, of course. So let's see, what's a good image for that one? How about this one? Another shot by my friend Ryan. That's a good one. So let's say we go to the shadows. We tap that. Boom, we have the luminosity shadows, which is going to be very, very similar to the composite shadows. In other words, it's going to be very similar to using regular data as opposed to Luma data. However, every now and then in some situations, having only Luma information in your selection is a huge benefit. And the blending is really the benefit to me, because when you start making significant changes, that blending is going to give you more. Instead of like a false positive, a false negative, you're going to be like, hey, this is great, right? So here, for example, I have the Luma shadows here. How about if I go to hue and saturation, and then I change the hue? Very, very subtle changes. Okay, I can even colorize if I want. Add a little more color to it. And look how I can change that grade. I can have a purple, pink, or maybe a blue, a little more color, cyan, green, yellow. You see that beautiful blend of shadows using luminosity information. Again, I'm not trying to lie to you here. Definitely a composite selection of the shadows will be very similar. But trust me, when you get in the habit of using only Luma information for your selections, it makes a big difference. Let's go ahead and put midtones. Okay, let's see that one. You know what? We're going to do a hue and saturation again because that's just a really obvious way. We can shift. That starts changing the colors of the car. We may not want that, and that's okay. We don't have to have that, but you can see what's possible. We can even increase the saturation of the mids, decrease the saturation of the mids if we want it more muted. Can add some white. This is lightness, so it's going to be linear, but very subtle changes to those mid-range. You can barely see that. Let's brighten a little bit more. Very subtle changes to the mid-range. And again, having that luminosity data to make the selection is really kind of the main benefit. Here's a dark shot by Ryan as well, so it's going to be rather different. So if I go to the shadows again, you can see there's a lot of it. So let's say I go to curves. And I'm going to put it on luminosity blending mode because I just want to brighten. I get to use a curve to brighten the shadows up ever so slightly, and it's all blended nicely because, again, it used luminosity information to pull the selection, the shadow selection. And that's what these are for. Fast selections using smarter, if you will, techniques to get a smoother selection. Most of the time on the Lumas, they're not going to be that different, but on the Chromas, they could be quite a bit different. It's just a good habit to get into. Now, let's move on to, sorry about that noise, I'm tapping something on my desk here. Now we have these next 5, and these are really like granular when you want to get control, and they increase in that control as they move downwards. So I think the best way to show it would be, let's see what images we have. Let's go ahead and start with this one. We have this landscape that I found, some horse by a marsh of some kind. That'll work. So let's see, Tri-range HSB Replace. Now, what could that mean? Well, Tri-range to me, in my sort of nomenclature, is highlights, midtones, and shadows. So we're going to separate the image into those ranges. So then you can do HSB, hue, saturation, and brightness replacing. Okay, so we use a little bit of blend mode math, and we have it in such a way that we can replace color. Let's go ahead and run that and see what happens. So when you tap it, here's a little bit different. It's going to say, hey, you need to start from the background or a flattened version of the image. It needs that raster information to create all of this, okay? So hit continue. And when you're done, obviously nothing has changed. This is where the layer stacks start getting a little complicated and people go, oh, I can't do this. But you can. Trust me, you can. Layer stack exists because it needs to, but you can do this. All you have to worry about, as you can see here, is the shadow solid color, the midtone solid color, and the highlight solid color. Everything else, you don't really have to mess with. We have Chroma HSL down here. We'll talk about that in a second, but we don't have to mess with anything. What we have done is we've separated the image into mids, shadows, and highlights in such a way that it's all blended back together evenly, okay? And with what's the benefit there? Let's say I go to my midtones and I choose reds. You see, I can start putting any exact shade that I want. I can change the hue. I can dial in any shade that I want. And when I say HSB replace, I mean replace. For example, there's a pure red. You see what we've done? We've completely replaced it. We've taken it from the neutral gray, which leaves the image alone. We can add a little bit more, darker, lighter, or completely replace it, anything, because that's what we're doing. We're swapping it out. You can really prove that in the highlights. If we go to the highlights and choose bright red, we're just swapping out the highlights for red. Now, you may never, ever need to do that, but think about the very subtle idea of maybe going from neutral to a little bit of a blue tone in your highlights. See that? And then the shadows, again, replace. I can make the shadows white if I wanted to, but that's not the point. The point is to dial in exactly whatever it is we're after. There's a blue, a little slightly lighter blue, maybe a purple. There we go. Went from this to this. Different grade. Okay. Now the chroma data, we've talked about chroma already, is down here on its own. And you have a HSL or a hue saturation adjustment layer clipped down to it so I can make changes there. I can take saturation down or up, not affecting the Luma data. Very, very subtle. It's kind of our baseline, if you will. When we make grading changes on top, we can make overall changes below. That sends that information upward into the layer stack. Now, again, the layer stack is what people tell me, oh, it's intimidating. Look, you can take the top folder here and just close it and just close it. You've made your changes. Cool. Now you can keep working if you want. You can also flatten to a new layer. You can flatten the whole thing if you want. Just tuck it away and don't let it intimidate you. The fact that the layers, exist allow you tons and tons of control. That's the benefit. And that's why I want you guys to really give it a shot and not feel like, oh, it's complicated. You know, panels are great and they're useful and they're convenient. And sometimes the UIs can be great. The user interfaces can be awesome. And sometimes they can be a travesty, to be honest. But when you start learning how to leverage layer stacks, you'll realize, oh, a lot of this stuff is what panels do. It's just that I have the ability to do it right here on my layers window. So let's say you're done with this and you go, no, I love it. You can hit, Shift Option Command or Shift Alt Control E, flatten it to a new layer. You can delete this if you want, this folder, or you can just keep working. You can also leave it alone, like I said, and create mastering layers on top of that. We brighten a little bit here, deepen the shadows a little bit with a little mastering layer. Cool. But if you need to open this and make a change, you always can. It's just a way to control things in an absolute way. Yeah, it makes a tall layer stack. When you're done, you can just flatten if you really want, or export and save this as a PSD, or don't save it at all, right? But it's about total control. And most of the time, I think anyway, when people think, oh, I want more control, is when they are frustrated. When they're trying to make a change and it's just not working. The saturation isn't pleasing. The color shift just doesn't work right. And this is why these decomposition tools exist, so you can do that. Now let's go over here to this very low res sort of desert scene here. Obviously it has a lot of faux color in it, and that's okay. No big deal. So let's go ahead and go to the Tri-range HSB Replace Advance. Gonna go ahead and run that. All right, so now this is a little more complicated layer stack, and it's only the beginning of what you can do with it if you want. Let's go to our shadows. We just did this a minute ago. Let's go to our shadows and add, how about like a deep purple into the shadows? Isn't that a band? Yes, it is. Okay, so it went from that to that. Now we have a purple, but we have a shadows adjust. Most of the time, guys, when you have these levels clipped down to the mask, you probably want to use the middle here, the middle slider, which is kind of our mid-range sweet point. Go back and forth, very subtle, and we can make it deeper on the shadows, or we can make them a little lighter. This is affecting the range a little bit too, but the intensity mostly, right? Also on the mids, let's put some color in there. How about, see how we've kind of woken up that desert image now? Okay, let's go to our mids again. Sweep ever so slightly lighter or darker, changing the range a bit. You can technically change the low end to overall intensity, but be very subtle. Once you start changing the brightness, it gets weird. You don't want that. You want the low end or the mids most of the time. Highlights, let's see what we can do with highlights. How about we add like a blue-green highlight, cyan. And then again, we can shift that highlight. And the bright one's a little bit less obvious. It's not the most obvious thing in the world because of the way it blends, but you can still adjust the intensity ever so slightly. So that's a little bit more range control of each color. So we went from this beautiful grade. I don't know who the artist was on this, but they did fine. But let's say I wanted a really warm, softer, subtle purple thing. Look, I've done it. And I've done perfect HSB replacement. I don't have to worry about, oh, is it smooth enough? Is it not smooth enough? It's the exact color that I want. How do I add purple and lighten at the same time? Well, you just come in here and put in the exact purple that you want. That's what HSB Replace is a benefit for, right? So I went from this to this. Now, when I said it's just the beginning, look, you can come in here to the shadows adjuster if you really want, put a curves, hold down Alt or Option, click in between, and now we have a curves affecting the shadows mask. And with very subtle changes of some kind, you can also affect, let's put a little contrast to it. You can also affect how that mask is, right? So that's what you're doing. You're changing the range and the intensity of these masks. And again, oh God, we have a huge layer stack. Look, 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 just close it. Just close it. I've talked to students so many times about this kind of thing. Just close it. And you don't have to add these layers. You don't have to use the option here with the advanced options. You don't have to do that. You can just use regular old HSB Replace. Flatten to a new layer or delete it and keep going. All right? Now, let's try... Why don't we need something with a lot of different colors? I think, we might just go back to this one. We're going to use the color chart in a minute, but I really want to show you what happens here. I think that might be the best one. Yeah, we're going to go with that one again. All right. Now, you want to talk about control. This is where things start to get really on a high level of control. This is absolutely wonderful for things for images that have lots of different colors in them, like a landscape, which sometimes landscapes can be monochromatic. But in this case, we have yellows, we have cyans, we have blues and browns. We have all kinds of different options. And that's why it really works well. Obviously, it's wonderful for portraits as well. Please don't misunderstand me. We're going to show that. But let's talk about what NBP 60-degree Hue Adjustments is about. Okay, this is number one. Let's go ahead and tap that one. It's going to let you know again, got to start either from a background or a flattened version of the image, like a flat layer. Boom. Now we have another cool layer stack with rainbows. What is all this? Well, first of all, each one of these ranges, here's magentas, blues, cyan, etc., has a mask. And if you look at it, this is a chroma mask, or a mask created with chroma information for the blues, cyans, greens, and yellows, and of course, reds and magentas. Not a whole lot of magentas in the image, obviously. But we start with curves. And the reason why I say start with curves is because this is just one thing that you can do. And it's just an example. This is going to help us change the luminosity of a range. Obviously, nothing on magentas. But if we go to blues, we can change the luminosity of the blues. If we go to our cyans, we can change the luminosity of the cyans. See that? And you can see where this is going. We obviously have the greens right in that edge of that water. If we want to match that up, go to our yellows. Brighten them up, darken, whatever you want to do. Just brighten them up a little bit. And then we have our reds. Very, very subtle little range of reds in there, and that's fine. But here's the thing. You have different folders. So if I want to go to my cyans, I can also come in here and choose vibrance and only add saturation and vibrance to cyan, or take it down, increase it or take it down, just on that range alone. And on my blues, let's say I can add hue and saturation and shift the hue around. I want it more cyan. I want the blues more cyan. See that? So now I have hue and saturation changing to blues from this to this. Beautiful. And how about our yellows? What should we do with our yellows? Oh, I don't know. How about we want to make them even brighter, but I don't want to do it on a curve. So I'm going to add this. And I'm going to kind of blow out the brightness of the yellows from that to that. Cool. Absolute granular control. You have everything separated with chroma information on the 60-degree hue split. And then you can use whatever adjustment layer you want per range. And that's just obviously beautiful, again, for landscapes and stuff. But that's just one option. Who knows how many different layers you can use. And you don't even have to use them all. You can run this and only affect the blues and cyans. All you want to do is modify the water in the sky. And now you're happy. You don't have to use the rest of them. Again, close it or flatten when you're done. If you close it and keep working, that's fine. You can make changes later. But close it or flatten it when you're done. Very, very, very simple stuff. In my opinion, anyway, it's simple. All right. Now, let's get a little more. Let's complicate this layer stack even further. How about we go back to our little BMW here, and we're going to go to 60-degree hue plus Tri-range HSB Replace. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's HSB Replace of everything. So let's go ahead and do that. Let that run. Takes a minute. You want to talk about layer stacks that might intimidate you? Here we go. All right. So it's a pretty tall layer stack. As you can see, we have nice rainbow colors to show you the different ranges. And of course, the grays down here for the luminosity area. So all this means is we've decomposed our image in such a way that we can granularly change the main 60-degree hues, right? The rainbow, red, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and magenta, and the shadows, midtones, and highlights. We can do a HSB replace on all of them. Remember, we did that already. So if we go to black, I can show you, I can make it white. See, in other words, I can do whatever I want. It doesn't have to be a wild change. It can be a subtle change, right? Beautiful. No problem at all. Mid-range as well. I can make any changes to the mids that I want by choosing the exact color. But we can also do that now with our main 60-degree hues. So if we went to, what's going to be an obvious one? How about the red? If we go to red, we can just dial in a different hue. They're not super obvious, but there it is. Yeah, okay, so there it is. Pink, purple, blues, greens. We can dial that in exactly like we want. We'll see what the yellow's doing. Probably not a lot. Okay, just a little bit of the foliage, but we can make it green if we wanted to for some reason. Cool. We can make it more orange. That's neat. What's going on with our blues? Okay, just a very, very subtle change there, but still could be creative or corrective. We don't want to change necessarily the colors of delivery of the card. We wouldn't want to do that on this, but you can see you have control of all of it. So if I came in here to like shadows, I can be like, oh, I want a light blue shadow and I want the reds to be a little bit more orange. I have a little more pink. There you go. And then what else? Our yellows, we want them to be more green, so it looks a little summery, I guess. There you go. Let's see what else. How about our mids? What are we gonna do with our mids? We can make them more like a lighter purple, not so much color, something like that. What about our highlights? What do I want to do there? Sort of like that. That's a good, decent basis. Again, close it out and then turn it on and off and see what you've done. It's about controlling absolutely every single detail. Now, before we go on to the even more detailed one, let's try everything on a color chart. This is going to help, I think, visualize what's going on for you. All right. So if we went to the Tri-range HSB Replace, we run that real quick on our color chart. Okay. We notice that our shadows look like that. We notice that our midtones look like this, and then our highs look like that. So if I go to the mids and I choose a color, only changing the mids. It's pretty obvious what's happening there, right? Okay, and the highlights as well. Just replacing that color, replacing it. Now, if I went to the full one that has a 60-degree adjusters on it as well, as including the Tri-range with the HSB Replace function, now we see that this is reds, yellows, right? So if I go to reds, for example, and I change the hue completely, I have some, some things there for the eyedropper. So I can make them from red. I can make them cyan. I can make them yellow. You see what's happening. You see what's happening. And I can dial in anything I want. I can make it pure white, like I told you. I can make it pure black. And it'll blend it nicely in. And again, we still have the mids down here. Do anything we want. And you can do not just one at a time. You can do them at all. So if I came here, for example, if I came to all of these and made them red, you can see where this is going. This is more just for fun demo. When we decompose the image into the 60-degree hues and then make them all red, well, now we've colorized the image red. Not that you'd want to do that, but you might. Who knows what you want to do? What if you want the cyan range to be a different color? You want cyans to stay cyan, but you want everything else red. You see how the color chart really brings that out. You can see, oh, that's what's going on. And even though you have this huge layer stack, again, close it, or turn it off when you're done. Always, always, always keeping all the control in the world. Now, with that said, I want to show you even more granular control, and I think I'm going to use this one for that. Because although this is not an action you're going to run a lot, it's pretty cool. It took a very long time to make, but it's really powerful. It's the 30-degree Hue HSB Replace. You go ahead and run that. It's going to let you know, of course, you have to start from a background or a flattened version of the image. Let that run. Here we go. Now, instead of the regular rainbow that we're used to, red, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and magenta, now we have the in-betweens as well, including pinks, violets, azure, as they call it. Okay, we have cyan green, which is just what I call it. There's other names. Yellow, green, orange. You'll start playing around with these. So for example, on the oranges, you can make them more yellow. Is there anything in this? Oh, a little bit in the boat, a little bit in the boat. You can target that. If you want to look at it, hold down Alt or Option and click on oranges, and you can see where the orange range is. And then hit the little eyeball again to bring it back. What are the reds doing? Hold down Alt or Option. The reds also in the boat, of course. I bet we know what the blues and cyans are doing. A little bit of cyan in the water. Here the azures. Azure, I guess. I always say azure. And the blues ever so blended in. We got the yellows. Doesn't matter. You don't have to visualize them necessarily, but you can make changes exactly on the range that you want. Now you might think, Why would I ever make the yellows into blues? Honestly, you wouldn't. But little changes, little subtle changes. You can even come here and go to saturation and just take the saturation of the yellows down. See that? Just a little bit. No problem. You can go to the reds and you can take the brightness of the reds down just a little bit. You're not going to see a whole lot of that. It's just going to change saturation into the boat. But let's go to the azures again, the azures. If we come here and go saturation, we can take the saturation down. We can take the brightness down, which is not going to change saturation. You notice it's just changing the brightness of that range. And of course the hue, we can shift the hue either subtly for a little more purple water, a little more cyan water, or crazy if we need to. Doesn't matter. We have full control. Now, what is this enormous layer stack going to do for you? Well, you don't necessarily need to use every single one of these ranges. It's just if you're having trouble targeting a specific range, stamp to a new layer or start from the background if that's where you're at in your workflow. Run this and you'll see all that granular control of every single range. Made the change that you like, pretty good about it. Again, close the folder or flatten to a new layer and continue going. This is not necessarily the type of workflow, if you will, that you're going to use every single image. It's great for color grading, great for creativity. But when it comes to the 30-degree HSB Replace, it's not just a demonstration. I'm hesitant to call it a demonstration because it's actually quite usable depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And it could just give you control that you didn't even know you had. So when you start running this kind of control, you're like, oh, I could do all kinds of things. Let's go ahead and run the 30-degree one on the color chart just to show you what I'm talking about. Give that a second. And of course, if you have very high res image, 16-bit and all that, it's going to take a little while to run, okay? But if you look, for example, here, the yellow greens, you can see that range. Here, the oranges, you can see that range. It's broken down into 12 or 30-degree increments, and there it is, all broken down. And then again, if I take the violets and I make them red, there you go, complete replacement. Make them white, complete replacement. That is the entire point of that crazy layer stack. And like I said, when you're done, close the folder to help you mentally. You know, you're like, it's too crazy. Delete it when you're done, flatten to new layer, etc., etc. So it's actually not as complicated as you might think in terms of how to use it. The question is, when will you need it? That's hard for me to answer. It's hard for me to tell you when you will need it. But once you start having this kind of control, more than just separating frequencies, you're like, whoa, I can almost do anything. Now, speaking of almost do anything, let's go ahead and open up this image again, our portrait, okay? And let's talk about some of our workflow stacks, okay? First and foremost, we have NBP Dodge and Burn. Pretty straightforward, but if you run that, okay, there we go. We have Dodge and Burn available to us. Now, if you're not familiar with Dodge and Burn, we have videos on that too. But we have curves brightening, we have curves darkening, that's our burn. And then I happen to have the Luma visualizer layer on top. This is just temporarily turning off the color because I like to Dodge and Burn with color off. I don't want to see color information. And as some people like, you can also toggle the contrast booster on and off, which helps you visualize darks and lights a little bit better and makes the process of dodging and burning arguably more difficult, but you get more of a refined result if you power through. It's like swinging a baseball bat with the extra weights on it, okay? So it's just a way to visualize what's happening a little bit better. And that's why it's called Viz. And the DSAT is what I like to do. You can turn that off. And as a precursor to kind of a message we're really trying to send as we move forward with new action sets. If you're Photoshop savvy, please modify them to whatever you need. If you need to reprogram this action to where this desaturation layer doesn't show up, do it. That's what they're for. They're for you to tailor them to your workflow. Reprogram the action, go ahead. Obviously, we can't stop you and we don't want to stop you is our point. Modify these things however you need to if you're a savvy Photoshop user. But anyway, there's Dodge and Burn. Here again, comes into little folders. You can tuck it away if you want to keep working above it. You can just turn off the desat layer and keep working above it. You can also work on a black and white image this way. It doesn't have to be color necessarily. And when you're done, you can flatten to a new layer, etc. Let's go ahead and clear that one out. Now we have, this is our Chroma Luma Dodge and Burn workflow. Let me show you what that does. I was going to kind of talk about it, but I'll show you first. There it is. Same situation, but now instead of just simply, putting an adjustment layer on top to turn off the color by showing only Luma, now we have Chroma, the color information, separated. So we don't have to worry about it. We can just come in here and turn it off. And then we can do all our work with dodging and burning that we want with the Chroma data protected on top, allowing us, that's why we have this layer called Chroma Paint, something you'll see pretty regularly. This Chroma Paint, if we take, let's say, a 10% flow on a brush and we choose a mid-range of the skin tone, we can paint, and as you can see, we can color over with that exact color. Why is that important? Well, sometimes when you're dodging, let's go ahead and turn off the chroma. Sometimes when you're dodging and burning, but specifically in my experience when you're dodging, if I'm brightening a shadow, like right in here, right? I have it on a 1% flow. We have videos on dodge and burn you can check out, but if you don't know. But let's say I brighten that up. Cool. Then I turn on my chroma data and I got a bunch of gray in there, right? Go to my chroma paint layer. Again, I like it like a 10% or so. Choose a mid-range skin tone and paint over that area. Maybe right even in here for this pink. There you go. Look at that. And we went from there to there, and we can change the opacity too. It's too strong. How about like a 70%? There you go. From this to this. See, what happens is when you dodge and burn, sometimes you get color shifting because you bring up a shadow that's really dark with dodging and it's slightly different tone in there. And if you just turn off the chroma for now and get the luminosity looking good, when you turn the chroma back on, you can quickly paint over and solve these weird color anomalies, right? That's why this layer stack exists. You can do your dodging and burning exactly how you need to do. Now, on top of that, don't get me wrong. If the chroma's off and you're over here working this Luma layer, you can also heal on it, okay? Because why not? It's just a raster layer. You can do all the healing tools you want. You can use the remove tool while you dodge and burn. Then you can put the color back on. You also have, of course, the contrast booster if you really want that. So you can, see a little bit better with dodging and burning. It's just the way, again, this is another level of splitting. We have dodge and burn, which isn't a split in and of itself, but we put chroma and Luma separated and we can modify them as needed. Not because I say so, but because those color shifts when you're dodging and burn can be annoying. They can give you a false idea that something is wrong. And instead, you run this layer stack and you can quickly change the chroma. In fact, I run that one most of the time, even if I don't use the chroma, because I know if I need it, it's there. Now, we also have these next three are identical layer stacks, but they include frequency separation, hence FS, okay? And chroma Luma splitting. The difference, of course, is that one uses median, one uses Gaussian blur, and the other one uses surface blur, the three most common types. Can we make more if some reason someone wants dust and scratches? Sure, we sure can. But let's say we run median, frequency separation, chroma Luma, and dodge and burn. This is a master workflow stack. We tap that, it says you should start from a background or a flattened version of the image. Yeah, you probably should start from the background. You can do healing first, or you can do healing in the stack, but let's go ahead and run it. Give that a minute. Okay, now we choose our blurring operator radius, right? Now we have videos on frequency separation. If you're not sure, we're just gonna go with 10 for now. And there it is. The image is unchanged. But we are ready to work. Let me explain how this works. Again, we're gonna have a more detailed video on this, actually showing kind of a walkthrough of how to use it, but this is the basics, all right? If we turn off our chroma, which is just kind of a matter of process for me, it's tucked away. The color is safe. It's protected on top. We can do anything else underneath because frankly, most of our changes like dodging and burning, healing, most of our changes are going to exist in the Luma information. Not all, but most. We can just color later. And that's why we're like, as Dennis Dunbar likes to say, we're kind of, dividing and conquer. Let's work on Luma first, and then we'll get our color. Now, again, there's some things that kind of exist in both realms, and that's the nature of things. So if you're more advanced in workflows, then you might be able to identify when you need to run one kind of layer stack versus another. But if you're new and you want to learn this one, just play with it. 95% of it is going to work 95% of the time, okay? So this is frequency separation on the bottom. We have a folder called Luma Paint. Look, all that is it's not a folder, excuse me. All that is a layer in between the high and low frequencies. So if you were to paint in there, you'll see, it's just above the low frequency, which is our quote unquote color information, but in this case, it's Luma, and the high frequency, which is on top, right? That's all that is. And if you're not familiar with frequency separation, you might not be familiar with this, but we have the high layer duplicated and clipped down. In other words, allowing us to do healing directly on that layer. The regular healing brush works fantastic. You can do healing up front. You don't have to do it here, but the option is there, okay? And if you're doing, frequency separation painting, as it were, if you're down here kind of, brushing this a little, I'm overdoing it, but if you're brushing color or, luminosity in here, smoothing out underneath the eye, change the opacity at to 50%, whatever. If you determine that your frequency separation work is good, but you need a little dodging and burning, well, it's right on top. You can dodge and burn right now. dodge and burn. Remember that eye, dark area under the eye I want to lighten? And I thought, ooh, there's going to be a color shift because there was a color shift, right? Okay, so I've done a little bit of a frequency separation. I've done a little bit of healing. And then I turn on my chroma. There's the color shift. Go to the paint. Choose a, like I said, 10% flow. Choose a color, a mid-range color, and paint over. From there to there. See that? From there to there. I did it sloppy. But can you imagine with you get used to the way the stack works. You get used to the order of the operations, and you can do anything with this layer stack. We have a quad, a four-way split here, where we have the high frequency separated from the low frequency, but we have that on the Luma because the chroma is separated from the Luma. So it's sort of four, if you will, and then dodge and burn in the mix. Does that mean you have to use every single layer? Absolutely not. They're just there. You can ignore the dodge and burn layer. You can ignore the frequency separation layer. Probably won't, but you can. And the chroma is just there to protect the color. Because in many, many workflows, whether it's a human being or something else, if you're messing with a lot of fixing, right? Sometimes, especially in a real detailed workflow, sometimes you find that the color gets kind of a collateral damage. You start messing up your color because it's there and you don't want that. Now, I know this is I have to answer this right now because people have asked. When we're dealing with Photoshop's new AI functions, that's a different animal. AI makes all kinds of decisions. It is not granular enough to say, hey, I want AI to do something and make sure you don't add color. Make sure, because you can tell it, keep it in black and white, and you might get some toning. You can tell it to make something in color from black and white, and it might not. AI still has a mind of its own, and it's awesome. But I don't recommend using gen fill or any type of generative work in Photoshop unless you're just using it directly on the flattened version of the image, or at least a flattened layer or something like that. Because in a separated workflow like this, gen fill is just going to be lost. It's not thinking about you separating frequency, you separating chroma and Luma. It's not thinking about that. It's just working with RGB, if you will, what we call composite. So with AI, make your AI changes on flattened versions of images, or at the very beginning. If you have something huge, like I need to remove a fire hydrant or something, let AI make those choices, okay? On composite or flattened versions of things. The separation is a whole different thing, okay? Now, one final little function here is NBP Chroma Skin Tone Selection, okay? So if we tap that, it's going to do a subject selection, Photoshop's, okay? And then it's going to target the skin tone range using chroma information, which makes for a more accurate skin tone selection. I'm going to show you this real quick, and then I'm going to mention a quick caveat. So let's say I go to curves, because I already have a selection running. I mean, look at that skin tone selection. That's phenomenal. And in a minute, I'm going to explain to you why this is not going to be relevant eventually. But for now, put that, let's say, on luminosity, and now I can change the tone of the skin without affecting anything else. Her hair is involved, which is normal because it's the same range, of course. All right. But we can mask that out if we really, really needed to. Now, that works really well. And people who've been following NBP for a while know that I do that a lot. I use chroma information to create skin tone selections, and it works really, really well. So let's run chroma skin tone selection on here as well and see what we get on this image. All kinds of different things happening. You know, her hair is going to be involved. There's a garment that's brown. It's probably going to be involved. And I'm going to get to my point in a second about how this is not going to be relevant eventually. But for now, it's the most accurate way to select skin tone rather than just Photoshop's own function. Let's just go to curves again. Look at the mask. Not bad. We mostly have what we expected with a couple of shadows and things that are missing. Now, why is this not going to be relevant? Well, because Photoshop Beta already shows us that we have body part selection, for lack of a better term, faces and lips and noses and ears and arms and legs and, you know, chest and whatever, hair. All of that is already in Photoshop Beta right now. It works really, really well. Capture One's body part selection works really, really well. AI is going to dominate. So selecting by skin tone range, if all we want to do is select skin, it's going to be irrelevant. But here's what's cool. We can modify that. We can modify these actions very, very quickly and make actions that use that function. In my initial testing, quick comment before we wrap here, in my initial testing with Photoshop Beta, you can program those skin tone body parts, excuse me, not skin tone, the body part selections, the AI, into an action. I've already tried it. It does work. However, that is a moving target right now. You know, Adobe keeps making changes to Beta. I don't know what's going to be locked in yet, but I'm testing and it's working pretty well. So eventually we're going to have skin tone or body part selection, excuse me, Very, very good, just like Capture One. And we won't need to worry about using chroma data for skin tone. However, Chroma and Luma works a lot of different ways for lots of different things. These layer stacks, they're big, but they're not as hard as perhaps you think. Play with them a little bit. Understand that you use them and then you flatten. You use them and then you snap to a new layer. You don't need to leave them open. You know what I mean? You don't have to nerd out with 75 layers on a layer stack if you're not a big compositor. You just use it to separate everything the way it needs to be separated. Make your changes, flatten, and continue. Play around with these stacks because, again, when you run, let's go to this shot again, just for grins. If you run the big one here, okay, you run this on your shot, you're like, this is a final image, so it's not fair. But let's say you're not totally sure about your color. Run this, play around with it. Come over here to the yellows and change the hue on it. See what that does. Okay, now I've made the yellows a little bit more orange. Look at that. Okay, never know. Maybe that's what I wanted. I don't know. Maybe I want less saturation in it. I don't know. Maybe I want the highlights to be more muted, so I'm going to make them more cyan, blue, and there you go. Okay, something like that. Boop, boop. You're dialing in the exact color you want for HSB Replace. And in the midtones, who knows? Who knows where you can go with it? That doesn't look great, but you get the idea. Start playing around with these layer stacks because it could give you ideas for workflow, for color grading, for color correction, etc., etc. It's a good way to understand what might even be possible that you didn't think was possible. And that's why this action set even exists to begin with. Try it out. It's not expensive. Don't be scared of it. You'll find so much that you can do. AI is gonna it already has like one in terms of like skin cleanup and things like that. We have so many options for that a proper workflow for skin cleanup isn't necessarily replaceable yet, but AI is really good for day-to-day portrait skin retouching. Beautiful for that. But when we want to control specific ranges, we want to get a real workflow to have all kinds of detailed, granular control over things. Even if we just want to boost saturation in a smart way, we can do decompositions that give us a lot of control. So that's why I want to show you that today. Check those actions out. Again, I know it's a long video, but if you've sat through all of it, use the chapters below to kind of go to the different sections if you want, or drop me an email, nbp@ninobatista.com, and I'm happy to answer questions. I want you to try this. It's very useful. It's evergreen. It will forever be useful, being able to decompose an image so you can control elements in it. This is very common in the commercial retouching space. There's all kinds of different ways to do this as well, even in the world of video. This is just a set that I thought made sense for sort of all of us, really, And like I said, when you have these huge layer stacks like this one, just close it or flatten when you're done. It's really not that big a deal.